I don't have a last name.
We are live.
Oh,
We are
okay.
live.
Now we're-
All right. This is Senate Finance. It is not yet Friday. I know we're coming up on school vacation, so this will be a rough week. But we will get through it. Today, we're going to take some testimony on S 39, which is an act relating to state aid for school construction program. We do not have S 39, but I'm anticipating it will show up here at some point, or can hightail, I believe it's in education.
No, you got it.
I got S 39. It is not on.
It's not on our board, but you got it. You had it. I thought you
Do we
did.
get 39? No, we don't.
Isn't that the school construction?
Yeah,
I thought for sure
we were gonna
have.
ask if they would do it,
Yes.
but they haven't done it.
Maybe I
I will
dreamt it.
remind them that they could do that. Okay. At some point, it will touch base in here because it will require raising money. We are going to be taking some testimony today from Eric Lafayette related to school aid for construction program. And Eric, you probably just tell us who you represent. And
Absolutely.
the floor is yours.
Just a quick question. Should I turn on the computer audio or not? For
No.
the Zoom? No.
No audio.
No, it makes a nasty noise.
Yeah. So I figured it was. And then, did you want me to share my screen? That's the best way to do it, right?
Scott, can you hit okay?
Yep.
Thank you. There we go. Okay.
All right, great. Hello, everyone. I'm Eric Lafayette. I'm a project developer with Energy Efficient Investments, also known as EEI. I was born and raised in Burlington, currently live in South Burlington, Vermont with my wife and two girls who both attend public school over at the Orchard School. I was also part of the school construction aid task force with Martine, which was my first kind of experience in the government foray, which was a lot of fun. EEI is an energy service company, also called an ESCO. We have an office in Williston, Vermont. We're currently working with multiple school districts around the state. And I'm here to talk to you about construction procurement and energy efficiency in the K through 12 market, and how I think performance contracting could be a valuable tool for school districts as we look at doing school construction aid moving forward. We operate throughout New England. We have a large presence in Vermont, New Hampshire, and Maine. We're very familiar with school infrastructure. It's our main target segment that we work with. And we look at financing options and long-term energy efficiency of buildings. We operate, some of our successful clients include the Addison Northwest Supervisory Unions, Springfield School District, Burlington School District, Missisquoi Valley Supervisory Union, Barre Unified Union School District, just to name a few. One of our successful stories from earlier this year, I posted on it, was Springfield School District. We started working with them about 3 years ago. We've had a 20% reduction in their energy bills. And we've actually quantified the sick days that they've lost since we've done a complete ventilation upgrade over there. They've reduced their sick days by 30% in the 2 years since we did the project.
Wow.
So, and it was cool because that was actually a phased project where we did the work over 2 years of ventilation improvements. The first year we saw an 18% reduction. And the second year we saw an additional 16% reduction once we actually did the entire school. So those were some quantifiable results that we were very proud of. And that work was done with a lot of ESSER funds for ventilation improvement. Energy Savings Performance Contracting, ESPC, is a solution to address aging infrastructure and deferred maintenance at our K through 12 schools, while making them more efficient, cost less to operate, and reduce our overall carbon footprint. The state of Vermont is facing significant challenges with their school infrastructure and has many decisions to make over the next decade on how to address the deferred maintenance. Questions that we often see from our constituents, facility managers: do we replace our equipment in kind? What are the long-term operating costs of a new system? What is the fuel source of the future, and how do we decarbonize in reasonable steps? And how do we know that the money that we are now spending today can incorporate into the long-term plans and vision of the district. ESPC, or Energy Savings Performance Contracting, is a solution that school districts can leverage to help make good long-term decisions for their school infrastructure. ESCOs will provide upfront investment-grade audits on buildings at no cost to school districts, and then works with the district to select energy conservation measures, ECMs, that fit the goals of the district. During the initial analysis, the energy conservation measures and their costs come from similar schools in the area. The process provides accurate budgets prior to procurement, ensuring timeliness and cost protections through construction. Once measures are selected, ESCOs will design the work and put it out to bid to local subcontractors for competitive local pricing. Benefits for the K through 12 schools are really the no upfront capital costs required in the initial analysis and procurement process. We can provide tax neutral options for schools where the energy savings pay for the work. We can address long-term deferred maintenance at schools, and we can provide schools a roadmap to infrastructure capital projects with long-term planning. And most importantly, the work that we do provides safe, healthy learning environments for our students. Typical facility measures that we address when we're at schools are really the items that address the energy. Four key components are your building envelope, so roofs, windows, walls, doors, and insulation, mechanical systems, boilers, ventilation equipment, building automation controls, plumbing, so fixtures, water heaters, anything that has water flow to it, and electrical systems, LED lighting, electrical transformers, switch gear, solar. Those are all items that have energy efficiency opportunities and are involved in projects that we're doing right now in the state. Combining projects. If you're upgrading a school ventilation and taking out the unit ventilators, there's an opportunity usually to replace the ceiling tile, the floors. A lot of times the systems that we're putting in are above ceilings. In that case, it wouldn't make sense to put the old ceiling tile back in. Same thing when we're taking out a unit ventilator. A lot of times there could be asbestos floor tile around it. So instead of just doing a spot abatement of the floor tile, a lot of times we're abating the whole floor and putting in new VCT flooring or whatever may be required. There's also certain thresholds of renovation. So a lot of times when we're doing ventilation upgrades, we're providing new ductwork down corridors. Part of that requires us to upgrade egress. So life safety systems often get triggered when we're doing the projects. We have to maintain smoke and fire barriers through the egress corridors. We also find a lot of ADA issues, American Disability Act, which also usually gets triggered. Once you pass a certain threshold of school renovation, a lot of times 20% of the funds need to be put towards ADA upgrades, and that's a requirement for building applications in the state. Combining projects that save the district money and procurement time addresses more issues than just energy efficiency. So a lot of times these projects lead to other similar types of stuff inside the school that helps out the overall renovation to the space. So our services, and really the services of any ESCO, ESCOs provide turnkey options from schools from initial analysis, design engineering, financing support and information, commissioning, and then long-term reporting to verify the savings. We provide financial support, including recommendations and assistance in grant writing. We maximize state rebates through Efficiency Vermont and other providers, and we inform them of USDA low-interest grants or loans. We're looking for every source of funds to get these projects over the finish line because we're incentivized to do so. We recently helped Hannaford Career Center receive $96,000 through the Inflation Reduction Act, an IRA, a direct pay option for solar projects on the job that we did 2 years ago that really provided no benefit for us. But when the funds became available, we notified them of it and we were able to secure those funds prior to there being a hold on those being dispersed. In New Hampshire, we're working with multiple school districts around the state on a new comprehensive building aid application that really addresses school visioning and programming analysis that I think could be beneficial to the state as well. Ultimately, we need to keep a substantial number of our schools in this state, and we need those schools to be safe, healthy, watertight, heated, and efficient. Energy service performance contracting can do that for the state. This is not the option to go through and build a new school This is really how do we keep the doors open? How do we make sure that we don't get hit with huge bond votes down the line by doing stepped capital improvements in our districts? So why are we here? What I'm here for is to review the efficiency or performance contracting statute for school projects in the state. Right now, it requires approval from the town voters for anything greater than a 10-year payback. We're asking that it get changed to a 20-year that really matches the reality of energy efficiency today, the life expectancy of the equipment, and then ultimately to provide more upgrades to the school. A lot of times when we're looking at doing boiler replacements, window replacements, it's very tough to get within that 10-year payback term. With an expanded 20-year payback term, it would allow us to essentially take on more school infrastructure projects in the state. The change would resemble similar laws in Vermont and surrounding states, so it would be more closely to New Hampshire and Maine. And the reality is that cost neutral contracts where energy savings paid for the work in 10 years is very tough to accomplish. And the ability limits the school upgrades. 20 years is often attainable, and it can include solar, LED lighting, like I said, mentioned before, windows, and then also roofs. And it would align with the state of Vermont BGS requirements that also has a 1-year payback term for theirs.
Eric, before you check, do you mind if I ask?
Yeah.
Okay.
Is that Integrated Arts Academy and the geothermal digging?
That is the test lab that we
Test
put
lab.
in
Okay.
initially. Yep, and it's
Great.
still being utilized.
Thanks.
And that just got filled last week. So specifically what we're looking at is really this Vermont statute 3448, section C, number 3, where it's the voter approval of a proposed performance contract. If the terms of the proposed performance contract permit the district to make payments to the contract over a period of time exceeding 10, we're looking to have it changed to 20 years, then the district shall not enter into a final performance contract until it receives approval from the electorate to do so. So that is really what my presentation is on. I apparently went much faster than my time allotted today. I know you guys are busy, so I'm happy to answer any questions you guys may have.
Thank you. This is really interesting stuff. I'm not sure how this would change in the potential new world order or new school order that we're talking about. Because voter approval of things will undoubtedly change, but under the current regime, what is the average cost of these projects? So I understand the kinds of projects they are, but without voter approval, what is the kind of cost here?
So a lot of times when you're doing, say, a fuel switch from oil to propane, if it's a high school, you might be looking at $600,000-$700,000, and that would be a whole new mechanical room. Anywhere we did a project for Mill River, this was a few years back, which was a cost neutral project. I think they were about 2.5 million, and that addressed building automation. It addressed a lot of the controls in the controls in the building. There's a new steam boiler, windows. So they range on the cost neutral side, anywhere from, the lowest of doing a $20,000 project, which we're more than happy to do, all the way up to $3-4 million, depending on the size of the district and the needs of the school.
Okay, and how do school districts generally pay for them? Do they take out a bond?
So a lot of times schools have been taking out bonds when it goes past the 10-year threshold. If it's below 10 years, then a lot of times we're looking at doing lease agreements with them. So there's leasing, there's third-party companies that go out there and solicit lease agreements from different banks. So a lot of times when we're doing LED lighting, this was a year ago back when they were incentivizing it. Those had payback terms in the 7 to 8 year time frame. We would also look at potentially doing like a few windows or a new school entrance along with the LED lighting that had it just below that 10-year threshold. And then they would work with either a local bank or they would put it out to bid and they would get lease financing for it. After the lease term is up, they would still own that equipment.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
How do you interact with efficiency Vermont?
Oh, we do a lot of work with Efficiency Vermont. So they bring us into projects as well. So we did we're working right now with Vermont Academy. They were burning 80,000 gallons of fuel oil a year. It was, something that Efficiency Vermont has been wanting to tackle for a lot of years. It's a very inefficient system. They brought us into that school, they introduced us to them, and now we're actually working on phase one of the renovation. I know it's not a K through 12 school, but usually they're one of our first contacts. We get rebates through Efficiency Vermont, Burlington Electric, or whatever utilities would be out there. And they notify us of different grant opportunities as well. So we have a
Okay,
close
so
relationship.
you do the work. They may identify the problem. but
Yep.
You
Usually we
change
get,
the light bulbs.
yeah, yeah, exactly. A lot of times we negotiate with Efficiency Vermont.
Okay.
It's a lot of like, these are really what the needs of the school are, and they help us maximize what we can get for a return for the school. So a lot of times it's energy modeling and providing them more information on products and
But you
whatnot.
would need, you could do a lot more schools if payback were 20 as opposed to 10 years.
Exactly, yeah, and it would certainly help out the schools that have a tough time passing bonds or passing budgets in general.
So to follow up on the chair's question about Efficiency Vermont, we're having conversations down the hall, Senator Beck and I in the mornings about the Efficiency Vermont funding and the flexibility or inflexibility of it. And I'm wondering, have you run into problems where you're trying to get some of that funding, but you hit the wall because it doesn't fit into the work you have to do?
Yeah, yep, we absolutely run into that. I mean, they're a partner. A lot of times the projects that we do are custom incentives. So
Uh-huh.
it's not just your standard, X and you get Y in return. So we have Kathy Reynolds, she actually just retired last year, but she was our rep. We're working now with Dan Edson. But a lot of times when we're starting a project from that initial analysis, we're running different projects by them because we need to provide those upfront rebates, even though they don't usually commit to them until the project's been fully designed and approved. But yeah, no, one big thing that really stinks was, not providing incentives for LED lighting, because LED lighting is a low hanging fruit in a lot of schools, and there was very good incentives with it. And when you coupled the LED lighting with building automation and doing like a fuel switch from oil to propane, that was a really nice target project. We did a lot of biomass, and those had really good payback periods with them. So they were heavily incentivizing wood chip boilers and pellet boilers. So when those incentives came out, a lot of times the districts that we're working with, if they had aging boiler infrastructure, we'd be bringing those incentive programs to them as a solution to the problems.
But some of the Efficiency Vermont funding is specific to electric energy efficiency. You're not able to use it for thermal?
Yeah, they don't give rebates for, a gas boiler, for an oil boiler going to natural gas, even though there may be efficiency picks up and decarbonization with it.
Yeah.
There would be no incentive, but they would give incentives for, a lot of times ventilation systems with energy recovery, building automation systems. They would usually give quite a bit of incentives for that. So we work with them. They change their kind of incentive plans and what they're trying to target on a yearly basis. And, they've been a good partner. But it is a little bit prescriptive, and usually we have to sometimes cater the projects around the incentives that they're able to provide. Usually those are not make or break for a project. But I can tell you that they're not huge rebate where they would typically make the difference. The LED lighting a couple of years ago, they were at times supporting up to 20% of that rebate. That was, a deal breaker for a lot of these schools because, it was taking payback periods that were in the 12-year down to 8 to 9, and it was making, a lot more attractive for these customers. And actually the health benefits and what we've been hearing from teachers and students with the LED lighting upgrades made significant changes at the schools. So that was very positive feedback. I'd like to see that incentive come back.
Yeah.
So.
Thank you.
Okay,
You may already have discussed this, but I assume various projects that you do have various life cycles and various estimated lives. As you look at the projects that you do, what kinds of life cycle exists for each general type of project?
Yeah, so I mean, mainly the projects that we do have 20-year life cycle minimums. The leasing companies that finance these projects won't finance past the life expectancy of the equipment. So a lot of leasing companies, you know, and then depending on what the size of the lease is, determines what the terms are going to be. So on a smaller LED lighting project, a lot of times you can only get lease terms up to 7 years. So if you're working with a supervisory union and you combine multiple schools together, even though these lights have 25-year life expectancies, they'll sometimes jump those terms up to 12 or 15 years, depending on it. Boilers usually have a 20-year life expectancy. Roofs, same thing, 20-year warranties. And windows are usually 30 to 50 year, depending on how far you go with the initial purchase of the equipment.
I'm gonna buy my new oil boilers from you because I've never had one last anywhere close to 20 years.
Well, it takes good maintenance on them, and you have to have, you know, preventative maintenance programs and service agreements. I mean, one of the big things affecting boilers is the water quality that you put through them. And then certainly residential boilers don't have as long life expectancy as commercial boilers. So a lot of times the wood chip boilers going in are 50-year boilers. I mean, most of the ones that were put in the 90s are still operating today for schools, and the Messerschmitt ones are still vital to most of our high schools in the state. And then as you get smaller to the cast iron boilers and those are 25 to 30 years. So usually the bigger the equipment goes, the longer the life expectancy, but it means a bigger capital upfront.
Okay,
Get a bigger board.
Senator Matt?
I'll start in 20 years.
So, do you guys, do you GC these projects too? So you're there through the whole entire project,
We do.
not just linking up with other contractors then?
Yeah, we don't leave. I mean, usually depending on what the project is, there's a level of oversight
Yeah.
on the job that's going to be required. And that's really usually depending on the scope of the work that we have. If it's a roofing project, it doesn't always make sense to have, you know, one person on site all the time.
Yeah.
It's going to be the same crew. And then, you know, that's a way that we can reduce the cost to the owner. But a lot of times on, you know, a major HVAC project, we're doing usually summer slammers. We're not usually shutting down schools. So it's get in there, get everything done and get out. And that requires a high level of hand holding and holding people accountable to get their job done.
No. So you take them through the whole process.
Through the whole process. We help them find the financing and then we do the commissioning at the end. And, you know, we're providing reports on a yearly basis on the energy savings and ensuring that they meet those targeting goals.
And along with contractors, are you having any issues finding contractors to be able to, you know, if you're doing HVAC work or mechanicals and?
It's been, I'll tell you, it's a lot easier now than it was a year ago.
Yeah.
I'd say the competitive bidding is back out there. I would say that started 5-6 months ago, where contractors are getting hungry again. 2 years ago, it was definitely tough. One of the things that we really try to do in all of our projects is create bid packages that are attractive to local companies.
Okay.
So we break out school by school. If this project's too big for one contractor, you know, we'll say, hey, you know, bid on this part of the project and don't worry about that part. So we have really good relations with a lot of different subcontractors in the state, which allows us to do this breakout. A lot of times we are purchasing the equipment. So we put the equipment out to bid. We purchase it so it's not getting the markup by the subcontractor. We provide the servicing and the startup of it. So we take the technical aspect out. We take the financing aspect of that out. So it allows smaller contractors to bid on our projects. So we have a lot of 2, 3, 4, 5-man shops coming in. They'll run the ductwork in between our new air handling units. We actually will set the equipment, we'll buy the equipment, we'll finance it. And it just opens up the door for more people to be able to bid it.
Do you have, is that on your website? Do you have your like list of bids that are out or?
We do
have to go
not.
through the schools or whoever you're.
Yeah, so I mean, depending on what, a lot of times we'll do notifications either through a bid registry system.
Yeah.
We try to talk to the schools and understand who their preferred contractors are and make sure that they get invitations to bid. And then we try to create, you know, competitive bidding situations from the subs so that, you know, a lot of times if you bring the small people in, the big ones are not interested in the project anymore. So we have to be careful on how we set up those bid packages to make them attractive to get the best price.
Senator, the last question.
Just wrap it up. I'm not seeing this in S39. I could be mistaken, but this is not in
No.
there. Okay.
This is,
This seems smart to do with all the deferred maintenance we have. I wonder if this is an ornament for our miscellaneous tax bill later in the session.
I was told today we might not get one. I've told them I think I need one. They apparently, everything that was in it is going on other bills.
Well, we have S39.
We have,
Or wait, maybe.
well, maybe that's, oh, we had it.
Well, we need to ask and we need to have it over.
Can I ask another question? I'm sorry, this is really interesting. Do you work on new construction at all? Like if we were theoretically building a new school?
We have been involved in it. It's just,
Thank you.
it's not as much of, it's, you know, a lot of times when we start working with school districts and we're doing like a planned capital each year, we're addressing some of the issues school by school. They'll ask us to be like the engineer of record on the mechanical system. So we do a lot of work with Manchester. And because they're pretty particular with how they want all their buildings mechanically run and controlled, they asked us to do the procurement, the design of it. It's not typical that we do it that way. And in that case, a GC would still, like, a GC would run the project and then we would help on the procurement of the mechanical systems.
I have one more question because I gotta ask it. Are you involved with? What's our term? P3?
P3.
Do you ever deal with public-private partnership contracting? This was something that was suggested to us.
This is, we were gonna build 3 schools.
Like if you
Is
build
this
multiple.
something you guys see?
We've done it in kind of different ways. I mean, you know, we've done battery projects, in different places where they're more of a power purchase agreement.
Yeah,
Same thing with solar situations where it's a private-public partnership. We've never like built a school and then leased it back to a school district or something. If that's what we're referring to.
I don't know
Yeah.
exactly. I think that's sort of
Yeah,
what
we
we're
know.
referring to.
We know
But I just
We do.
trying to connect the pieces that we've been told about, so.
Yeah, we do, like I said, we do a lot of different power purchase agreements, mainly in Maine right now, just because of the way that their their rules are set up where it makes a lot of sense for solar in that sense. But yeah, we're more than happy to explore it. And I think we're seeing more of that with the renewable energy standards that are coming out in the state. We do a lot of work for municipalities as well. So we're doing work for, the city of Burlington. And we're starting to set up a phased approach to all their city buildings.
Tier 3?
No.
I don't know.
No, tier 3 of the renewable energy.
I mean, we're trying to decarbonize most of their buildings. They're very expensive to do so. So
It's
we're
tier 3, right?
dividing steps. Yes.
Tier 3.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The room is filling up at the next discussion.
Great.
Thank you. It's good information to have this.
Yeah.
Work our way slowly through all the pieces of information we need to have to put a whole package together.
Well, I appreciate the time that you guys have given us, and if you guys want any references of the schools that we're working with, I'm happy to do so.
Okay.
We've had great success in the state, and we look forward to hopefully being a part of addressing a lot of these deferred maintenances at our schools. So, thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, we are going back to our area of jurisdiction, but we don't have to know yet either. And I'm still trying to find a copy. I'm looking for a copy of the governor's education bill. Do we have that?
Yes, I did bring the copy. I can.
There is a copy.
Yeah.
Copy. Okay. It's probably.
That's the one you sent the group on Friday.
Friday, okay. So it's on Friday's website, all right.
Oh, no, it's not. You would just ask me to distribute it.
Oh, it's distributed than it is in my part.
It's long, but a lot of it is just crossing things out, so it's a fairly fast read for a long bill.
Do we all have a hard copy?
No, would you like a hard copy?
Sure.
Yeah.
It's been introduced at this point. It must have a
Yeah.
bill number that we could, it hasn't been introduced yet.
I couldn't
I do not
find
believe it's
it.
been introduced.
No, I
Oh.
couldn't find it.
Okay.
It's an unedited draft that was handed out yesterday.
Oh, yeah, that's what I have. Yeah, okay.
Okay, so we are going to continue with our discussion of the yet to be named and introduced bill. I do have, you should also have the copy from, let's see, state guarantee mechanism like reading tax credit proposal. I don't have the whole thing. You can get me a hard copy. Yep. Okay. All right. So we're going back, and Ezra is here to help us understand the proposed foundation formula. And on up, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair.
Do you know everybody in here?
Oh, I think this is my first time presenting
think
for
it
Senate
is.
Finance. Yes.
So you need, we'll start with Chris. You want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, Chris Malley, represent Chittenden North, Milton, Westford, and Essex.
Hey, Ezra, Ruth Hardy from the Addison District.
This is Senator Martine Laura Bullock, who is Chittenden Central, I believe. I'm Ann Cummings, right?
Chittenden represent the southeast area of Chittenden County.
Let's go back to countdown.
Randy Brock, Franklin, Northern Grand Isle.
All right. Wonderful. And sorry, let me grab my final instrument here. So yes, great to meet all of you. I'm Ezra Holden. For the record, I work for the Joint Fiscal Office. And if it's okay with the chair, I will go ahead and share my screen.
Where do you have this on your website? So we're going to talk about the base funding, to which is added the weights, right? And then the categorical weight.
Right. So today what we're going to be talking about is a quick overview of the foundation formula, but the governor's proposed foundation formula, but really after having discussion with the chair, focusing on how change is moved throughout the model. If you change one piece, how that can flow through the entirety of the model and therefore affect the base amount calculated using this model. So I've constructed this kind of with a quick intro to this. Might be a recap for some of you. Some of these pieces might look new for the first time for you, just how I'm presenting them versus how they've been presented to you previously. And then we'll move on to the changes and how really it's interesting if you make one change to one area, it can flow throughout the entirety of the model, just to give you an idea of what policy changes can have additional impacts on the proposed foundation formula. So go ahead and start it here. So just to get this out of the way, Joint Fiscal Office, we are a nonpartisan legislative office dedicated to producing unbiased fiscal analysis. This presentation is merely meant to provide information for your consideration, not to give you any sort of policy recommendations, just declarations and information for you all. And I'll just add my own little boilerplate on here. Is this the work I'm presenting is the administration's work? However, I have made, as mentioned earlier, that one change to illustrate how if you change one part of the model, it will flow through. But the vast majority of this work is from the Agency of Education and their consultants. So just full disclosure for that. So we will talk about today what is the base, try and do a quick run through of that so we have more time for what I consider the kind of exciting part of today. Take a look at what's going into the base and then the illustration of the scale of the changes. And there's also an appendix at the end of this with a lot of the tables that go into the more granular calculations, but we would need an entire second testimony just to get through all of those. But I did put them in at the end in an
Get the
appendix.
foundation today, and then we'll get into the grain and sand another time.
Yes, absolutely. If you'd like to have me back for that, I'm more than happy to. But in the meantime, the appendix is there if you just want to see it immediately. So foundation formulas, they are not new. Vermont had one. They've existed within the United States since at least the mid 1900s in some form or fashion. And so a foundation formula typically starts with what's called a base, and the base is the core amount of funding per student before applying any weights for any special circumstances such as English language learners, the federal poverty level, special education, etc. So before any weights, any block grants, and it's typically understood to be an amount sufficient to fund what's considered, you know, if there is such thing as a typical student, what's considered a typical student in a typical setting. So just to lay the groundwork for that. So the governor's proposed base is calculated from the Picus and Auden evidence-based model. And this was developed by Picus, Auden and Associates to link strategies and resources in high-performance schools to state school funding formulas. I believe you all had some time with Dr. Picus yesterday in a joint hearing, so you've had a chance to speak with him about his model a bit. And so the most recent report, again, you probably are aware, is in 2024 in Vermont. He was also here previously, I believe it was 2016, and he's done this research across the country and other states as well. So this EV evidence-based base amount is built off of an identified set of resources, and these resources are identified using research from high-performing schools, and the idea is to bring all of these concepts that have worked on their own into one model. And this work was then further modified by APA Associates, employed by Agency of Education, hired by Agency of Education to produce this proposal. So quickly, we'll take a look at the base inputs. So those are primarily the schools, central office, and maintenance and operations, and the resources and staffing revolving around that. So there are some assumptions within the basis model here. So the evidence-based model distinguishes inputs across school levels, so elementary, middle, and high school, as well as at the central office and with your maintenance and operations. And so for each of these areas, each of these, I guess, broad buckets, you have two categories. It's either based around your staffing counts or your dollar-based resource allocations, whether that be utilities, ongoing maintenance, supplies for your students, etc. And so this model then takes those prototypical schools and aggregates them into a prototypical district. And that district is used to spread out your central office and maintenance and operations costs throughout the district if it's a resource that, you know, would be shared, such as your superintendent, business manager. And so that's included in the central office, as well as a set dollar figure per pupil to cover your district-wide expenses. And there is finally the maintenance and operations, which includes the staffing and those resource costs such as utilities and ongoing maintenance. So your prototypical school staffing. So here we have the three schools in the model. Your K through 5 elementary school, 6 through 8 middle school, and your 9 through 12 high school. And this is how it's presented by the administration in their modeling. You know, I know Vermont has some schools where the grades don't fit into these three neat boxes. You might have 7 through 12 or K all the way through 12, but this is just.
Okay, and you were looking at a school with 450 students. Am I reading that correctly?
Yes, so I can clarify for
Yeah,
that.
600 high school.
Yes, the prototypical model uses these set counts. It's just the amount that was identified through Dr. Picus's research as being your efficient school size. This is not representative of a particular Vermont school. This is just the students presented by the research by Dr. Pike and the APA consultants.
Yep.
That's why I'm not sure if you could answer this, and I don't want to put you on the spot, but why are we using the PICUS model as the model? And the reason I'm asking that is because, and this comes up in our healthcare committee all the time, our rurality and our small population makes us such an outlier and such a kind of aberration in any kind of modeling that and he even admitted yesterday that the fact that he hasn't had like interaction with a local, what is it called? That board of local something. It was a group that he normally puts together to have like a
Professional judgment panel.
professional, thank you. He didn't have that in Vermont. So and he admits that's
I think that, I thought it was APA usually does that. That was their technique.
Well, all I know is he did bring it up
Yeah,
yesterday.
he has not yet.
So anyway, I just want, I don't know if you have an answer to that question.
Sure. So the answer that I can give is the evidence-based model is a research-backed model that has been used elsewhere. And so these school sizes are the same school sizes that, for example, I believe the Michigan 2018 study used as well. So I believe this is kind of just a blueprint that is used for academic reasons. As I believe Dr. Pike has mentioned in testimony yesterday that, if enough time and resources were available, he would have preferred to do a panel. However, I will say that is part of what I'm going to show you today is I have actually said, okay, well, what if there were changes? And one of those, would be a policy change, but one of those changes was I set the high school's student count to the median student enrollment in a Vermont school containing grades 9 through 12. So this first part might be a little bit grading just because we will have a lot of these numbers here, but if you bear with me, when we do get to one of the examples, I did do some modeling with this. If that answers.
I really appreciate that.
And I think he said he has done modeling in Wyoming, and I believe that is the only state that is equal or more rural than Vermont. We are, despite everything we like to say, not the only rural state in the country. And we may have the most towns with fewer than whatever the X hundred number of people are. But I believe they're a lot closer together than they are in Wyoming. We don't have 200 miles between towns. So some of some are small by necessity and some is small by choice. And when we started doing these, we have closed. Riverton used to have, because you couldn't get out. So that's in Berlin, that headed school. There were, I think, 4 in Calais. There were, every neighborhood in Barry had a school that kids could walk to. And I remember when they closed the neighborhood schools in Barry and built elementary middle school. So we have been upsizing over time. It's mostly the roads got paved, the interstates got put in, and plowing got to be better. It's more, so that's our question.
Were you walking us through how the administration came to the 13,200 figure, or just the model that APA used to get to the 13,200 figure?
So, I'm sorry, could you restate the question? So
the administration came forward with a base amount of 13,200 per pupil. Are you walking us through how they came to that figure?
So this first part is a quick examination of the tables that go into that calculation, but for expediency's sake, my goal was to do that more of a broad overview rather than a step-by-step. I can at another time do a step-by-step if that would serve the committee well.
And I believe Dr. Pike has testified yesterday that APA had made some adjustments to his numbers to reflect Vermont reality.
Yes, well, and to clarify, this is from APA, so this would be the administration and APA, they're the same here. So this is right here, for example, these are the schools and the sizes with the same unit cost that was used by APA to reach that, to generate that 13,200.
Sorry, to comment too, but I don't know if I cut you off. So I have not heard of an elementary school in Vermont with 450 kids. All the ones I'm thinking of are like 200 to 300 maybe. So I don't know if you're gonna, in your model, you're also later on, if you're gonna do a.
Yeah, Esther said he's got a model with one just Vermont sizes, so.
Yes, I wanted to lay the foundation, but yes, that,
Thank you.
I hear a lot of concern regarding these.
Welcome to Senate Finance, Ezra.
I want this.
And I'll show you the.
Want elementary.
So again, this is the prototypical schools that were used in the original modeling. And this was the prototypical district staffing use. So that takes those schools that we just looked at, wraps them up, and you'll note here that the assumption used for modeling is a 3,900 pupil district. This was clarified the original APA modeling, and it contains 4 elementary schools, 2 middle schools, and 2 high schools. And so this is the overall, you'll see resources, that is the number count of staff, the unit cost, which is salary plus benefits. Those two multiplied together are where you get the total cost for each row there. So core teachers is 103,000 unit cost, which is the administration's proposed $5,000 in addition to the estimated median wage or salary of a Vermont high school teacher, as well as the benefits on top of it.
And then I have.
I would love
I
to.
would like to let Ezra get through his presentation. Go ahead.
Just unit is kind of abrasive. I'm just wondering why we even call a teacher a unit. I mean, their FTEs is, I think, a more common term, but I'll stop there.
I
We've
can't,
got all different
Right.
kinds of
This is
other
their
things.
yes,
They call them units.
Yeah.
yes, just reiterate, this table is plucked straight from the spreadsheet I was provided for this modeling, and I tried to change as little as possible for consistency's sake and to keep their work as their work and not me retitling their work and taking any credit
Yeah.
for it.
Sorry to say.
Tiny question.
Yes.
It's tiny. Thank you, that's right. How come APA didn't run why isn't this run on the 5 district model, which was the governor's proposal?
That's a good question. I would defer to the.
Yeah, I don't think Ezra can
I'm sorry,
answer why
Ezra.
APA
Sorry.
did what they did.
Because they're flopping something.
They're flopping.
Okay, let's let Ezra get through his presentation. He's
Okay,
just presenting the numbers.
so this is just to illustrate that there are student to staff, that there's a student to staff ratio, and I find this important for each employment class, employment category. So for core teachers, the model assumes that overall you have a 20.7 student per teacher, and this is your core teacher ratio. And so the staffing ratios are rather important for achieving the cost within this model, because as you may be aware, staffing makes up a very large chunk of the costs within education.
So if you took that down 10, you would be doubling the number of teachers theoretically, which would double your costs.
Sure.
I
So
mean, if you drop the ratio, you had 1 teacher for 10 students, which is probably pretty high in some of our schools. You would be doubling the cost. So what they've set up is the ideal. If we had an ideal or mimic system, that system is the ideal. Shangri-La It does not right now exist in Vermont.
Precisely, these are the prototypical
Right.
staffing numbers that you see here, not
If-
based on Vermont.
Right, if you could set up this mythically ideal school system, which probably exists somewhere in the country, but probably not in Vermont. Maybe we could find one in Chittenden County where it's bigger. But that's the ideal. That's the goal. Our challenge is, say, we can stay where we are and we can watch the costs go up and housing become more affordable because taxes are part of your housing cost. Or we can move towards this more ideal setup and how far our, first we have to decide that we want to move. Then we have to decide how far and in what direction we're going to go. Or maybe we could find a whole lot more money to just pour into the present system. Maybe.
Yeah, so exactly, the model is giving you a sense of staffing ratios that would be needed to achieve the sort of cost per student. Exactly. And so here I have presented the prototypical districts, their pupil resources. So this is the dollar figure required for the model to provide, whatever the different programs, career and technical education, flexible pathways, professional development, etc., for this prototypical district. And so overall, and you'll see that the resources and unit costs are kept away. So I believe that the reason for that is because some of these are variable costs. So elementary students do not have flexible pathways or career and technical education. Middle school has career and technical education, but it's at a different dollar amount. So the total cost for this district is what you see in the total cost. And if you divided that district wide, it would cost per pupil that $1,199 to provide these resources. So again, just level setting what the work that has gone into the calculation of 13,200. So that's the schools, a quick look at the schools. So a high level view of the prototypical central office. So this is the central office table provided by the administration. And so this assumes that 3,900 prototypical district that I just mentioned. And in this one, they do have FTE instead of unit costs, so unit count. And so if you have this prototypical district with this exact staffing and total compensation, you would have a per pupil staffing cost of $744 per ADM. And then you would have a per pupil resource cost of $450. And you'll see that is called out on the insurance, supplies, miscellaneous per pupil. And so, as the name implied, is to cover the miscellaneous district-wide supplies, such as central office technology, some building insurance for the district, etc. So that's what was put into their central office calculation. And then the maintenance and operations for this district, again, assuming 3,900 pupils, unweighted pupils. So you would have a per pupil staffing cost of $495. And that's based on 23.5 custodians, 9.9 maintenance workers, and 5.3 groundskeepers. And in the modeling, and unfortunately, we don't have the time to go through it here, but in the modeling, you'll see that some of these staff, such as maintenance, are key to the central office. And so they are designated as a shared resource, whereas some, such as custodians, are key to the specific school and it intended that they would work at the school that they're key to. This just consolidates all of that, and which is how the final modeling number is done. And it also adds in the $1 per square foot. This prototypical district was estimated to have 623,000 gross square feet for its buildings. And there's also $350 for utilities, and that is per pupil. So that's where your $1.4 million for utilities comes from. Your 3,900 pupils by that $350. And so overall, you would have a $1,014 cost per pupil broken down by $495 for staff and $519 for the non-staff resources. So to just aggregate that all together for in one slide, your prototypical district's cost puts all of that together into this $41.483 million and then divides it by the 3,900 students. So as you'll see further down this table, you see the school level base amount is different by school level, but the theory for the 13,200 is actually to take the total cost for the district and divide it by the 3,900 students. And so that was done to achieve a $12,845. And then as this work was done in 2024, a NEEP inflation index was applied of 2.76% to bring it up to the well-known $13,200 proposed by the administration. So
I know that people have asked this question, but I just want to underscore this. So this is all based on a 3,900 pupil district. But none of the districts they're proposing are 3,900 students. And have you seen in any of the information, because I know JFO's gotten a lot more detailed information than we have. Have you seen anywhere where they've grossed this up to the 35,000 pupil district or the 15,000 pupil district or anything?
I have not seen any modeling. I would refer that to the agency to provide a more granular at district level. You're correct.
13,200 is what they're saying is the base, but they're basing it on a much smaller school district size than what they're proposing.
Okay.
Do you have an answer for this?
What the math work out to?
Well, no, because they're making assumptions on, first of all, district offices, and the district office for a much bigger district would have to have more. And then also the school district's sizes, there's a point beyond which you sort of get diseconomies of scale. And you'll have multiple different type sizes of schools within the district. And not every school is going to be the sort of neat
Okay, well,
size.
yes, this is on an idealized. The question is,
I know, but their math, they never
but that's,
did their math to change the type of district size. I mean, they're using what the VSA is saying is more an ideal district size, more around the 4,000 number. But they're plopping it onto a bigger district.
So the only,
I know it's not your work,
Yeah.
I'm just underscoring it.
absolutely. So yes, this is based off of this model that we just did a quick walkthrough.
Yeah,
Apologies if it does feel a bit rushed or confusing, but for expediency's sake, trying to really hit the high notes. And so we can move on to some examples of,
okay, this is APA's numbers.
yes,
And the first numbers we got was the 3,900, that's core teachers, that's the 4,000 if you run it. Ideal district. And then this says 3,900.
they're all for 3,900.
They're all for 3,900, yeah. Okay, so if we stick with the 3,900, these are the numbers. If we take it down to smaller districts, because the number of schools within these districts are not specified, the more schools you have, the more custodians you're going to. I would assume the one nurse for 750 students. assumes that those students are all in one school. Because it's pretty hard for a nurse to be there when a kid decides to be sick. If they're moving between schools. So that's all part of converting this to Vermont. And we've seen proposed districts. We've got several of them up there. Eventually, there will be a decision on what is a feasible district size in Vermont, and then pricing out that size. I am looking at something like the School Boards Association for reference, just because that seems to be a more rational division. But we also heard that with the larger school districts, the ratio of property wealth per student is 2 to 1, and when we cut it down, it gets much wider. And so you have more prism issues if you do any kind of funding above that.
Sure, so
Tell me if I'm misunderstanding, but that's what I'm understanding.
So you're correct. All policy decisions on district configuration, what towns, what schools, all of that would have an impact. So today I'm just doing a very simplified version of this within the scope of their model, but those are all valid policy considerations to have, absolutely. Some of
We
them
haven't
are a
even
bit,
talked about where the mountains are in the middle of those districts and where the roads go.
But you should keep going. Yeah, you've got some good stuff in here.
yeah, so just to move on a little bit. So scale of changes within the base. So the base, as we just walked through, a lot of different components, a lot of different pieces that go into it. And so if you change one of those, they're going to be impacts statewide. And some of those would be small changes, some would be bigger changes. So for example, if the price of, let's say pencils or textbooks went up by $1 thanks to inflation, well, because we have weighted student counts with the current proposal, those are also policy choices, that $1 would increase the statewide education funds bill by $126,349. Not much on the scope of the education.
That's when you tell the parents to support pencils.
If you make a change to staff ratio, so for example, if a policy decision was made that said high school class sizes at 25 are a bit too unruly, we should cut that down to 23. Well, that everything else held constant in this model would lead to almost 14 million statewide increase, and that is incidentally about what 1 penny on the tax rate raises. To give you an idea.
In the class. Yeah, on average, these are all averages.
Yeah, if that,
Can make a $13.9 million difference in the total cost.
right. So that's roughly your 1 penny on the non-homestead, homestead equalized tax rate. So, and again, there are also some costs that lie outside of the base. So changes there aren't taken into account here because they were never part of the original modeling for the 13,200. So next I'm going to walk through 2 examples, illustrative, not a policy recommendation. These are just some things that I thought would be interesting for you to take a look at it, how
To
they
help us think through.
would impact the base. So first example, we're just going to say that the presented prototypical high school of 600 students, we're going to say that's okay, but we want the 23 students in a classroom instead of 25. So if you reduce your class size, that will increase your per pupil cost, like I mentioned. And so now instead of meeting the APA model's staffing cost per pupil of 8,865, this same high school, the exact same number of students, would now need $9,210 to operate for staffing because you now have the additional teachers through that smaller class size. So that's just a quick example, holding everything else constant with their modeling. So let's take it another step further. So smaller school as well as the smaller class sizes. So we're going to maintain that 25 being reduced to 23 students in your high school classroom. But the student enrollment at this high school is now 325 students, which I derived from being the approximate rounded median enrollment of schools in Vermont. And these are schools where the majority of their students are within grades 9 through 12. So this is a bit more of a Vermont number rather than the prototypical 600 number. I also maintain student to staff ratios to maintain the student to staff cost rather than defaulting to any other formulas designed to generate staff, because we're now changing the size of the school. So those formulas could all be thrown off. And in theory, as long as your staff to student ratio is maintained, the cost of that staff at the student per student should be maintained as well. But you'll also note that for this modeling, I determined that there should be a minimum, just for ease of modeling, a minimum of 1 FTE per position. And that's because I'm assuming for this model, no staff sharing or dual roles for this position. So the high school size is adjusted, but the rest of the district remains at that prototypical administration's district. So it was a 3,900 pupil district, but now it's going to come down because I've reduced the size of the high school. So we have 4 steps here. So first step, looking at this model high school with a smaller class size and a lower enrollment. Our next step will be to see how these smaller high schools, because if you recall, this prototypical district has 2 high schools. So see how that flows to the district office's cost. Step 3 is to see how that then further flows through the maintenance and operations for this district. And then our final step will be to aggregate all these changes together and see how the cost per pupil for this district as a whole, prototypical district, has changed. So step 1. So you'll see that the 325 is up there instead of 600. So the student count has been reduced. You'll also see that the student to staff ratio is being maintained at approximately 23 to 1, which is 23 class size, which we took a look at with the first example of changing 25 to the 23. So prior to this change, just to reiterate, it was $8,865 per pupil to cover staffing. But now, because the class size has changed as well as the high school itself has grown smaller, and I made for this modeling the choice that 1 is the floor for your FTEs. The cost has now increased to $9,996 per pupil, because for this, I determined that assistant principals would not go below 1, as it would if you just maintained your strict 1 per 600. I just froze it at 1. Same thing was done with your library media specialist, your nurse, your interventionist. Just the rule was that
You're gonna need those.
if the rule, so for this modeling, of course, that's a policy choice. The policy could be that you can have below 1 share through either dual role, where 1 person does 2 jobs, or you have 1 staff member who floats between 2 schools. But those are all policy choices and could be modeled differently. But these are the considerations, and you can see how that has increased the cost by, over $1,000 compared to the prior modeling at the high school level for staffing. So next step, how does this impact the central office? So even though we're not directly changing the central office's staffing, it's being indirectly affected because the district has now grown smaller. And again, with this model, I made the decision to maintain all of the student and staff ratios. And you'll see that the cost is increasing compared to the APA modeling because, again, the floor is one, so your superintendent remains at one, your business manager remains at one. That same cost is now being shared by fewer pupils, which therefore increases the cost per pupil from 1,194 to 1,241 per pupil. Now your miscellaneous cost per pupil won't change because that was set at 450 for this modeling, but that's policy change as well. So step 3, how does this affect your maintenance and operations? Well, you have the smaller high school, a smaller central office, and a smaller district. So like with the central office, you have some costs that are fixed. And for this modeling, I decided that to maintain the high school as the same size, I didn't shrink the square footage of the high school because that's a building. It's harder to change that compared to some staffing ratios. So that was maintained. And as were the groundskeepers, so some of these resources will go down a bit because of that reduction in pupil count, such as your utilities. But some of these can't go down. And so you now have fewer pupils bearing the same cost, which increases the cost from the administration's modeling of 1,014 to now $1,100 per ADM is the cost here. So, and feel free to stop me if you have any questions or I'm going too fast. So,
I've got a question.
On this unit cost, the units, which I still object to the use of, could you tell me if those salaries are based in Vermont numbers? And I thought I heard you say including benefits, but those seem low when I think about what the total fringe and all healthcare, sick days and everything else should be. So can you talk about the unit costs, salaries that are in this model?
Sure. So I'll just back up one. So these these numbers were provided to Dr. Pikus in 2024 by the Agency of Education, and they are estimated to be the median cost per position. So they should be Vermont-based salaries and benefits. The benefits number was also provided by the agency. Now, for some of these positions,
Healthcare included?
Well, we have 15% increases since then. Right? We have one this year and I think one, well, it wouldn't be this year's numbers, but we've had at least one since 24. So that would change it. But this is just to demonstrate, okay?
So
This is the median between South Burlington and Lowell.
Sure.
And I think you'll find a fair swing in your teacher's pay.
It's $42,000 for a custodian. I feel like you had to add on top of that the healthcare, right?
So I can request from the agency for some clarification on how they determined the salary and the benefits number, which was maintained from Dr. Pikus's work. But again, these were provided in 2024 for his work. Some of these positions, it is possible that, I would have to see what assumptions they use to find a median. Are all custodians full-time and get the full benefits? Were some part-time employees included with reduced benefits? I will need to see. I can certainly reach out to them.
Thank you.
But
This is just demonstrative right now. This is what happens if you lower the number of students. And in this case, we're talking one student. If you've got a school that's half the size, it's going to have a larger impact. If your school is smaller, but we have schools that were built 50 years ago for this class size of 50 years ago. They're now older, but they're the same square footage that needs to be swept every day and the floor is polished. And we know we've got a lot of deferred maintenance because the money is going elsewhere.
and just to perhaps maybe the point that Senator Chittenden you were bringing up is if a cost was different, then that would flow through the entirety. So yeah, absolutely. Clarity around if one cost changed, and that's why when the modeling was originally done by the administration, an extra $5,000 when that was added, because one of the administration's proposals was an additional 5,000 in salary for all teachers within this modeling. That's why, when that change was made, that would flow through and affect the base amount as well. So if something similar happened to a different employment category, you could see a shift to that per pupil cost and then flow through to the base. And so you see where all of these changes that we took a look at, first at the school level by reducing that class size and by reducing that high school size to the median Vermont high school, that also flowed through to the central office, assuming that this district has the other schools unchanged, flows through maintenance operations. So now we get to the district cost. So the district cost, you'll notice as a total has gone down from the 41 million that we looked at the beginning of the presentation to 36.5. But you'll notice that the amount has also decreased, or excuse me, that the enrollment has also decreased. So you now have to share this cost by fewer students. And because of the decision during modeling to maintain a floor of 1 and smaller class sizes, the amount added onto the base is more than the total reduction. So the amount added outweighs any of the per pupil costs that you are saving by having a smaller school. And so your base amount, after adjusting for the same inflation number, 2.76%, would be now $13,613 per student, as opposed to the proposed $13,200 per student. And so if this took place statewide, some rough calculations would be that you would see roughly $52 million statewide in increased cost just from these two policy changes of slightly smaller classes, and also that your high schools are smaller than the prototypical number. And this is assuming that the district as a whole has maintained the exact same as model. If you did the same exercise at every level, you could see additional changes. I have not done this modeling, but if a policy decision was made that middle school, we also would like smaller classes, you could see this effect continuing forward.
So I understand why you're describing them as policy changes, because they're not your decision to make. So I appreciate that. But in some cases, at least right now, they're not actually policy changes. They're just the reality of our school configuration. So it seems to me that even if theoretically or realistically we wanted to get to where the APA numbers were and the governor's proposal is, we have to have some kind of transition to get there. We can't just say, well, this is how we're going to fund our schools because this is the ideal that we want to get to in 10 years. So I'm wondering if y'all could work on how could we transition there? And maybe it's just that every 2 years, as there are adjustments into the configurations of our schools, we adjust the base and the weights. Maybe that's the transition, but it would be great to model that out so we can sort of see, because as I've said multiple times, to the point where Senator Kulik mocked me all the time about it, is like, you can't just take their model and plop it onto what we have now. We have to have this sort of transition period where we're saying we want to get there because we want to save the money, but that's not where we are right now. And we can't fund our schools based on some ideal that doesn't exist yet. So we have to model and prepare for that. And so how can we say, okay, next year is irrelevant in this because it's next year, but in 2 years and 4 years and 6 years, or whatever time period we say, as we adjust, as we make different decisions, we collectively as a state about what schools are open and how many teachers and kids we have in classrooms, et cetera, we're going to have a different base and different weights. So is it possible for you and Julia to work on that kind of smooth model that we could use over the next, I think it's gonna be at least 10 years that we're gonna have to do this.
Into that. I mean, we can theoretically move students around up on the chart as much as we want. But the first thing I want to know is how many schools do we have that are capable of holding that many students? And where are they? Because that, and what condition are they in? And then how many schools do we have that can can hold the next greatest number? And what would it take to add them up, which is where we get into school construction? There probably aren't very many schools out there that don't need, I'm looking at the school construction people, some kind of major maintenance to keep them habitable. Never mind ideal for students in the next 10 years. So there's a lot that goes into this. I think the lesson is the smaller the student body, the smaller the school, the smaller the class size, the more all those other costs add up on a per student basis. And that's what we fund schools on, is a per student basis. So we've got the same size schools we had 20 years ago. We have 10-20% fewer students. I don't know what that number is off the top of my head, but significantly fewer students. So the cost per student is going up. I think 3 years in is an incredibly optimistic time frame. 10 might be pretty high unless we can get a control on the cost increases. If we could get the costs down to our historical 3 to 4% a year, we might survive. I also know if we can keep coming up with $100 million a year to fight down the tax increases, not without doing serious damage to other places. And we know they won't let me do my job and raise taxes. So it's going to be a challenge, but I think we are at least going to have a growing map. I'm liberal when I say growing map. I think we need to ask the department if they do have any kind of a map. And I couldn't find, I think it's in the email that Charlotte sent us last week because the graphs weren't programmed well. But we did have a list of schools alphabetically by name, but not by county. And I think it had their capacity and the number of students. And we could look through that. But then we need a big map and lots of thumbtacks, and we can get that to start looking at where we have schools with capacity.
And where we have roads. And where we have roads.
Then where we have, well, I'm assuming the schools are on roads.
Yeah, but
Even though getting out to the Callis school is a little bit challenging in mud season.
but it's getting from one school to another.
It is now. I mean, to get from Putnamville to the Rumney School, or from Middlesex to the Rumney School here, you have to go over the dirt road or do a 20-mile detour. And that dirt road is where we almost had a woman die in mud. I think it was the year before last, maybe as early as last year. I mean, the mud season was horrendous, but they're pretty challenging, having driven them with some regularity during a normal bus season.
So I just heard you say two things, Madam Chair, and I just want to see if this confirms or if I can confirm it. One, I really feel like what we're talking about here are economies of scale through capacity optimization. That's what but moving kids around on charts is not what we do in Vermont. And so what I think, and they also, what I know about Vermont, they're not going to want us moving kids up into different schools out throughout communities that I don't know that you don't. So that brings me back to the timeline. And my mind is now gravitating towards, I think I do support a new districts, consolidating districts, and then having those elected bodies make these decisions. But you lay that out, that's a 2 to 3 to 5 to 10 year timeline,
Yeah.
which I'm on board. Journey of 1,000 miles begins with one step. But what I'm saying is I don't think anybody wants to hear Montpelier politicians talking about closing these schools and putting kids there. I think we need to think about those districts.
Well, we're in a dilemma here because nobody wants to hear us talking about it. A large number of people don't want any change. And an equally large number of people can't pay their property taxes. And some of those large numbers of people overlap. And to ask a local school board to make the decision that a large number of their friends and neighbors don't want them to make is not fair. I think it's our responsibility to set the course, to say that within X number of years, you have to reach this minimum class size or this minimum school size. And if you don't, we'll do it for you, kind of like go to the hall and work out a solution you like better than, but we will work one out if you can't.
And I don't think that's achievable with our current 119 districts, but I
No.
do see it possible if we had intentional, rational sized districts throughout Vermont.
And I'm looking at the school boards just because they're as rational as anything I've seen. I think most people will have visited the towns within those. I think with the 5 districts, a significant number of people will never have been to some of the towns they're being paired with. Took me a while to figure out where Buell Score was. Then I put
That's
up
in
the
my
sign.
district.
I
It's in
know,
Chittenden County.
it is.
Yeah.
Mhm.
It's
And it
gorgeous.
used to be in the Waterbury district, but
It's
they put up a sign, I figured out where it was. But there's nothing that says your review score until they put up a sign. There's no down, there's
30 people live there.
yeah. But anyway,
Most of them.
okay. I'm gonna let Ezra finish. And then I'm gonna take like a 15-minute break. And then I have committee discussion because we are going to have to start making some decisions. I don't know what, I know that Senate Ed is working on a governance structure. I will talk to them. They said they would release S-36. That's right. I wrote it on my hand last
Yeah.
Friday, so I would ask.
Yeah, exactly.
So we just haven't gotten it up. I will ask them to get it up to the secretary and get a
School construction.
39
School
school
We
construction.
have 36 in Buffalo.
That's so anyway, I did ask, they did say yes, just nobody followed through. So we will get that. Because that will have financial implications, which will, unless the state is willing to guarantee, we're gonna pay the debt service to the schools. The schools, the districts will have to bond. And we're going to have a rational proposal for that because we do need to make sure that they're on paved roads, that they're centralized. We may be able to cut down on some of the tuitioning if we put up a school in you know, in a larger district area than we have now.
I love that.
Hmm?
Love that.
Okay, so, but that's gonna require us doing some heavy.
What you do or you don't?
So, Ezra, finish and then we
This has
will.
been great, Ezra. Thank you.
talk.
Yeah.
Thank you all. So
And if you can stay with us while we talk, that would be helpful, or,
absolutely, if that's what the committee
I
would
mean,
like.
I don't, whatever you and Julia have for time frame, but letting us go on our own without anyone to say, yes, but this is what will happen if you do that, could be very dangerous.
I believe I have time blocked out with you all, with the committee until 4 o'clock on my calendar.
Great.
So if you would like me to stay, I can.
I've got to go prepare for a town hall at 5. So that should work out well.
All right, so just wanted to hit the summary slide here and reiterate that different policy choices, as I hear being floated around the State House and within this room, they'll have different financial impacts, such as what we took a look at, you know, and also that staffing makes up the majority of the cost within education fund. And this means that any change to staffing related areas will have a larger impact. And the majority of the proposal savings are from the prescribed staffing ratios, those number of students within the classroom, having that set number of staff members within the school, within the district. And so if any of that changes, as I think the example kind of illustrated, you will see some of these proposed savings being withdrawn. They'll be going back into the schools. And so currently, just for some perspective, Vermont has one of the highest student to staff ratios within the country. So 4.28 students for every staff member, not just teachers, but just staff members overall. Through
That
school.
includes para educators, right?
Yes, so that would include paraeducators. Yes, so school year 23 and 24.
Custodians.
Everyone who would fall within, I did link a source for that number, the NCES. They have great information. There's also a policy website called Edunomics. They do graphs using this information to kind of display how in some states you'll see enrollment lines going, staff lines going up, enrollment lines going down. So showing how that ratio is deteriorating over time.
Did you mention the two organizations again? NCUS?
Yes.
Is that the national?
Yeah, NCES.
ES, okay.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
NCES .ed.gov. And also the other one's called Edunomics, like education plus economics. And so they will do articles and research about all sorts of education and finance topics, including small schools, how to, some articles saying, the ability of sharing roles between staff members can make small schools viable. And so, so some real neat information there. But for reference, in other New England states such as Massachusetts, New Hampshire, and Rhode Island, you'll see that they do have these larger ratios. And here you want a better ratio because that means the cost of that one staff member is being spread among more students. And so that means that the cost per student is therefore going down. So Vermont is high in the country, but also within New England itself. And just to one, yes.
No, I'll let you finish your thought on that.
Oh, thank you. No, just to hit the last point that in Vermont, we employ more people in the education space, even as the student enrollment has gone down over time. Edunomics does have a neat graph using that. They took that NCES data and graphed it out to show how the difference between those two has widened, increasing that ratio. Sorry, Senator.
Well, what I was asking is we typically think of teacher to student ratio. Do any of these sources also look at the other categories and look at how states compare in terms of how many paraeducators you have per student, how many custodians you have, how many other things that would impact this? Is there any other one of these categories of jobs that you relate to students that may be either particularly noticeable, particularly unusual, particularly different in terms of how other states, as opposed to just teachers?
So I am not aware off the top of my head how many categories they divide that number into. I know that the particular graph and source that I used for this slide was the overall ratio. If that is of interest to you, Senator, I can see if I can find and perhaps share a link.
Yeah, if there's any, and again, I'm going to look at these websites myself to look for that, but if there's anything that leaps out, there may not be, but it's just a question that's worth asking, I think.
And the one difference we saw when Pillier mapped out their middle school, which hit the ideal within half a kid, was in the behavioral intervention is mental health. And that's what led me to the question of, do other states do the mainstreaming to the extent we do, or have the non-exclusionary discipline policies? Because basically we leave a teacher. And I think we're seeing mental health issues across the country. I don't think our kids are the only ones on the phones all the time. And there seems to be a correlation between the advent of screen time and depression, suicidal thoughts nationwide, from what I've heard over a couple of years in a couple of committees. So, and I've heard years ago that we had one of the highest rates of referring kids to special ed. I don't know if we've reversed that trend.
Not the other way.
Have we?
No, it's going the wrong way.
I mean, yeah, that,
Well, the other thing though, that we've noticed, I look at schools, when I was looking at schools a number of years ago, disparate rates of special ed referral from district to district. There were some districts that had virtually none or very, very low levels, and there were some that had very high levels. I was struck by the inconsistency with what I was seeing.
and
And
maybe,
again, then the allegations came that there were certain incentives for making some referrals that schools were using to gain the numbers.
some of this would
I don't think schools are paying our numbers.
Some of the-
Again, changing the number to make them more favorable from the perspective of the leadership of the schools. That's essentially what I seem to hear. And some of the numbers, just the fact that there was such a discrepancy did concern me as to why.
and I would think
I just think
that
it's a-
part of it could be the training and support the teachers get. I think most teachers in Vermont would give their right arm to have the kind of support and pay that Picus puts in there. What is it? A good portion of our teachers, and in some of our schools, the majority of our teachers are probationary. I hope the feds can't fire them, but that means you have, I can remember having a first year teacher with one of my kids in first grade, and she called up and said, how do you get them to listen to you? And I'm saying, you're the teacher, you should tell me how to get them to listen to me. But that takes experience, and it takes some support so that teachers can learn the techniques that it takes to manage students. And that's different than classroom learning. And we may need to do that. And what are you showing me a picture of?
I just was ready for my visual, but
Yeah.
sorry. If I could just raise one other thing that's gonna be top of mind is that if this 13.2 is really based on labor rates, these unit costs, which again, I just want to say I don't like that term. I would like us to recognize that pay rates across Vermont swing a lot.
Yes.
So there are counties where it's 40% more than our lowest county. So if we're gonna go with those assumptions, or that I'm more inclined to look at adjusted base rates, adjusting for the what is it, cost of living adjustment that somehow accounts for the labor variations in different parts of Vermont.
We will get to that. Once we lay the foundation, that's when we decorate. We know, and schools know, it's the same issue that the mental health agencies have for the home health. You get someone, you train them, there's an opening in either the state or the school, they go there and they make several $1,000s or more day one. And we are responsible for funding some of those agencies, and we've taken care of our own first. And yeah, we've got issues there. And they're level funded in this year's proposed budget too. Last year, if you remember, we had to raise some insurance fees to get a 3% increase in there. So we've got disparities. I'm pretty sure there's disparities in benefits. There's disparities in cost of living, but I don't know. It's just the cost of living that's reflected in
You can't get a
the
teacher
wages.
to the same salary in Chittenden County as you can in Essex County. Is the point.
Right. But is the cost of living the total difference? Because if it is, you're not going to make any more money moving to Chittenden. I think in Chittenden County schools, they're bigger. They're going to meet more of those costs per student norms. They can afford, with what they're saving, to pay their teachers more.
That's all the city.
Yeah, well, we can get that model out.
Are we now in the committee conversation period?
Well,
or
I'm
not
gonna
yet?
take a 15-minute break.
Whoa.
As Ezra, you've been through, we're in summary,
Yes,
been
absolutely.
through everything, okay.
We have, there is a consideration slide for people to ponder if they would like. You don't necessarily need me to read it to you, but I can if you would like, or you can just, you have it as a handout, I believe, and you can think about it. And yes, if you would like for me to be finished, I can certainly be finished. Whatever the
Okay.
chair would like.
No,
That's not pretty.
why don't you finish up your presentation?
All right, so just quickly, some considerations that I thought would be helpful to perhaps highlight here is that pre-K, while proposed to be a part of this system, was not explicitly modeled with this system. So that's something to think about. Does pre-K cost more, cost less, cost the same? Something to think about. And then how does the base as proposed interplay with the weights as proposed? Because right now, the base and the weights are set, but if one part changes in the proposal, do you need to change the weights, or will you leave the weights the same? Because the weights have a multiplicative effect. So if one part of the base changes, that then gets multiplied out even further through the weights. That's one of the reasons why I was able to show that with a calculation of $52 million increase, because it's not just all per students in seats, it gets played out through the weights. So that's another policy choice to think about. If one part of the base goes up, does part of a weight need to come down? Does it need to stay the same? So
All right, and the weights they used are not, we saw the numbers, but they are not the weights that they're not the numbers we are currently using. There were some, I thought I heard of Tammy Colby's numbers, but they weren't the ones that we had. And there were different places they took weights. Okay,
yeah, and so
so if we raise the weights, we're gonna raise the cost per student, basically. Okay,
statewide, the cost would increase based on however your weights and base move. So just thinking about, do you want them to move together? Do you want one to be lowered as the other goes up?
okay,
Just something to think about. And
that's
then-
right, because our weights, I don't think, and I'm looking at Senator Hardy, are based on the concept that there's a base funding there that is adequate for all the things this is supposed to be at.
Our weights are calculated based on a task capacity model, which is very
Very
different than our
different.
foundation model.
Yeah.
So there are ways to sort of translate our weights and recalculate them for a foundation model. And I believe Tammy Colby has done that and has presented it to the
I know,
House Ways and Means Committee. So
I know.
yeah, I've asked multiple times if we can get her in here to talk about it, but there are ways to use her data or updates to her data, or I think even prop block it. I don't know, but with API.
I don't even know if she's gotten there because I know she canceled one day. Something was happening with Washington. She had to take care of.
And speaking of,
She couldn't make it here.
well, when you talk about updating, that's another thing to consider. How do you update this base over time? Do you want to use the inflation factor? And if so, what inflation factor? NEEP has been used by Vermont for years, but is that what you want to use? You could also make a policy choice tied to a different inflation metric. Or would you prefer a professional reevaluation? Some states have professionals reevaluate every so number of years to determine if the base is sufficient, needs to be increased, needs to be considered as well. And also, not every cost was explicitly included within the base year. So a couple of big ones would be your capital construction, major repairs. That was not explicitly modeled. So thinking about how
Gonna eat out any savings.
the state would like to model that, pay for that. And the proposed transportation aid with the current proposal, it would be 100% transportation covered instead of the 50% reimbursement in current law. If that were to sunset over a certain number of years or transition back to 50%, where would that funding fit in the base? Because currently there is no transportation at all. So that's just something to think about. It may never happen, but if it were to happen, and those just a few things to think about. I'm sure there are plenty of others that can be considered as well. And just to quickly flag, I have a resources sheet here, a link to my House Ways and Means testimony where I did more of a very granular walkthrough. I was in there for a few hours, so broken up with a lunch in between. So there are 2 videos if you do choose to put yourself through that.
Flush this out.
There's also a link here to Dr. Pikas's report. That is the foundation of the foundation that EPA constructed.
Yeah.
And the link to a couple documents and then provided by the administration. And finally, I do have an appendix with more of these granular tables if you are interested to see exactly what was the per pupil resources for the prototypical elementary school. I have a table in there. Food for thought. I'll finish, Chair.
Okay. Thank you. Committee be back here at 3:30.